Well, let me first just spend a couple of minutes in explaining to you what the objective was today of this meeting. Like the Secretary pointed out, um, I think it was a very fruitful discussion to have had the corporate world come and talk to us in making sure that this concept, which is fairly new, this concept of uh, corporate social responsibility to become a reality in this country. Very few countries around the world actually have any sort of legislation which mandates CSR as a spending activity. India, I think, can be one country that can lead the way in showing how it can be done. And to their credit, I think the Indian private companies, the private sector, the corporate sector has done an exceptional job in the last few decades in terms of capacity building, working with the communities. The new companies bill has now been introduced in Parliament. It has got the approval of the Standing Committee. It has been approved by the Cabinet. We met today to make sure that the way forward is done in a transparent fashion. The issues, the suggestions, the advice, the questions that the corporate sector has can be addressed appropriately before we draft the rules of the new law that will be made hopefully in the winter session. I have written to the Parliamentary Affairs Minister to take up this issue and the new companies bill be taken up for consideration and passing in the winter session. The CSR as a concept, like I said earlier, is a new one. The idea is old, but the concept of having it into law is new. The 2% spend is only for companies that meet a certain threshold in terms of turnover and asset base, and they need to be making profits for the first 3 years of 5 crores and above. Clearly, there are many companies that are not in the position to make profits, or companies that are still in the gestation period. This does not apply to them. But entities, corporate entities who are working here, who are earning revenues from the community in this country, I think they also feel the need to discharge the responsibility of capacity building, of helping the sustainability and the livelihood issues of the people that they work with. And we got some very, very good suggestions. There is a long list which we think can be undertaken by many corporates, and one of the points, like the Secretary mentioned, and I did make this mention in the meeting today, we have about 20,000 schools in this country that are primarily girls' schools of class 9 and above. And the rough calculation tells me that about 100 crores if spent can make a few toilets in each of these schools in 20,000 schools which are girls' schools. And one major reason why young girl students don't carry on to get further education is that there are no proper toilet facilities. It's not something that we talk about very often, but I thought of this one issue can be taken up, and some of the corporates and some of the PSUs can actually do this. It's not a large amount of money, but for us to be able to say in a year or 2 years' time that we have made open defecation, history, at least for the girls who study in rural India in government schools, I think can be a big achievement for us. The fact that the government has its own responsibility is not lost to anybody, but the Indian corporate sector, I certainly believe, has a very important role to play in giving the sustainable development, in creating vocational skills, in establishing the goodwill that they need to have in the country. There is now a great disparity between the rich and the poor in this country. The amount of billionaires India has produced over the last decade and a half, I think, is substantial. Today, with the internet, with electronic media, with newsprint, people are much more aware as to what the companies are doing, the kinds of profit they're making. And I think it's only fair for us to expect that a part of that exercise should be to percolate those benefits to the communities in which we work. But the fact that I pointed out today is the government does not want to become a watchdog and to be the invoker of Inspector Raj, where people will feel compelled under some fear of the reporting of inspection, etc. We're trying to make this as open, as transparent as possible. We are making sure that the reporting is self-compliance. We're looking to have a template which will be available on our website, where companies can report as to what work they've done. And the bill that is in Parliament states that if an entity is not able to spend the 2% of the money, that company should report in its books as to why it was not able to do so. That report also is voluntary, but the fact that you don't spend that money and then you don't report it in the books, that will attract compoundable punishments. And I think that is something that has been agreed between the corporate sector and the Standing Committee when the law was being made.
What is compoundable punishment? In what case?
It's in section 134. You can have a copy of it. But the idea is not to make it not to have the government really, wield the big stick. We want it to be participatory. We want it to be voluntary. And I was very encouraged with the response I got from most of the representatives of the corporate sector, who are very willing. In fact, my ministry and the government wants to be an enabler. We can do the guiding and the kind of suggestions that they need working on the ground. Also, the fact that they can work with each other as opposed to redoubling the efforts or learning from successes and failures of other corporates. But I think this enabling environment needs to be created, where we have an ecosystem where there is stakeholdership at all levels, from panchayat up to the federal government. So these are the areas that we had a long discussion, 2.5 hours of real frank discussion as to how to take this forward. And I believe that the Indian corporate sector is as much of a stakeholder in making sure that our society, our economy grows with the energy that it has in itself. And I'm very confident that this, in the next few years, will evolve into a very, very successful model, where we will have participation, collaboration, help and support of the government and the private sector, and we can really transform the lives of millions of people today who are looking at the Indian government as well as the private sector to better their lives and their livelihoods.